They were the two most powerful artists on the planet. They tried to be friends, but one single, brutal insult sparked a Cold War that never ended. To understand the war, you must first understand the kingdom. The 1980s. It wasn't just a decade. It was a neon-drenched battlefield of sound, style, and ambition. And on this battlefield, two sovereigns reigned supreme, each ruling with an iron fist from their respective thrones. In one corner, you had Prince, the purple Yoda of Minneapolis, a musical enigma wrapped in lace and mystery. He wasn't just a musician, he was a force of nature, a one-man studio orchestra who could bend genre, gender, and expectations to his will. His kingdom was Paisley Park, a sterile white fortress from the outside, but a psychedelic, velvet-lined universe on the inside, a place where time didn't exist and music bled from the walls 24 hours a day. He was a creature of the shadows, communicating through cryptic lyrics and searing guitar solos. His power was raw, untamed, almost supernatural. In the other corner, you had Madonna, the material girl from Michigan, a pop art phoenix who had risen from the grimy clubs of New York to become the undisputed queen of pop. If Prince was a mystery, Madonna was a headline. She wasn't just a singer, she was a cultural strategist, a master of reinvention who understood the mechanics of fame better than anyone on earth. Her kingdom was the entire world, every television screen, every radio wave, every magazine cover. She was a creature of the spotlight, communicating through explosive music videos, carefully crafted controversies, and an unapologetic command of her own image. Her power was calculated, brilliant, and unstoppable. For a brief, glittering moment, it seemed these two kingdoms might unite. The world held its breath. A collaboration between Prince and Madonna wasn't just a musical event, it was a geopolitical summit. They were drawn to each other, not by romance, but by the gravitational pull of equal and opposite forces. They recognized the same insatiable hunger in each other's eyes, the same obsessive control, the same understanding that to be an icon, you had to build your own reality. Their first collaboration was for her album Like a Prayer. Prince didn't just play on it. He unleashed a blistering, uncredited guitar solo on the title track that felt like a divine schism, a sound both sacred and profane. It was a perfect fusion of their two worlds. Then came the duet, Love Song, for the same album. The track itself is a strange, hypnotic artifact. It's less of a duet and more of a tense negotiation. Their voices weave around each other, never quite touching, like two planets in a dangerously close orbit. The lyrics speak of love, but the feeling is one of suspicion, of a power struggle. It was a warning sign we all missed. We thought we were witnessing the birth of an alliance. In reality, we were hearing the first shots of a silent war, a war that wouldn't be fought on stages or in the charts, but in the cold, quiet spaces between whispers, insults, and egos. The Paisley Park sessions for Love Song are the stuff of legend, but not for the reasons you think. It wasn't a celebration of creative genius. It was a cage match between two master manipulators. Witnesses from those sessions described the atmosphere as electric, but not with creativity, with tension. Prince, in his domain, was a benevolent dictator. He expected his collaborators to be extensions of his own musical consciousness. He would communicate in gestures, humming a melody, expecting it to be translated perfectly. He hated explaining himself. For him, music was a language spoken by the soul, and if you didn't understand, you didn't belong. Madonna, on the other hand, was a field general. She arrived with a battle plan. She questioned everything, every chord, every beat, every lyric. She saw a song not as a divine revelation, but as a product to be engineered for maximum impact. The conflict was immediate and profound. Prince would spend hours crafting a complex, layered harmony, only for Madonna to suggest simplifying it for the radio. Her pragmatism was an insult to his artistry. His refusal to compromise was a challenge to her authority. There's a story, an urban legend, whispered by a sound engineer who was allegedly there. He claims that at one point, after a grueling 6-hour debate over a single drum pattern, Prince simply vanished. He didn't storm out. He just wasn't there anymore.
Madonna and her team were left in the studio, the looped drum pattern echoing in the cavernous space. An hour later, he returned, holding a single perfect white orchid, which he handed to her and said, "The drum pattern is now complete." He never mentioned it again. It was a power move, a bizarre, surreal gesture designed to destabilize her, to remind her that in his house, he controlled reality. The song got finished, but the alliance was fractured. It was a collaboration born of mutual respect for power, but doomed by an utter incompatibility of method. But the true breaking point, the moment the crack became a chasm, wasn't in the studio. It was a dinner date. A single, disastrous evening that would go down in pop culture infamy. The setting was a sterile, high-end restaurant, a neutral ground that pleased neither of them. Prince, who barely ate, allegedly spent the entire time in a near-silent state, observing her. Madonna, a born conversationalist, tried to fill the silence, talking about her projects, the industry, the world. She was performing, trying to find common ground. Prince didn't want common ground. He wanted surrender. According to the legend, the conversation was brutally one-sided. She talked, he watched. Every word she said seemed to hang in the air, judged by his unnerving stillness. The climax of the evening was a moment of pure psychological warfare. Madonna, perhaps exasperated, made a joke, a light self-deprecating comment about her own ambition. Prince didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He simply stared at her for a long moment, then allegedly leaned in close and whispered something so quietly that no one else could hear. Years later, he would reveal the sentiment behind that moment in an interview, delivering the line that became the official declaration of war. He said the date made him realize he needed a housekeeper, not a girlfriend. The insult was surgical in its cruelty. It wasn't just a dismissal of her as a romantic partner, it was a dismissal of her as an equal. It was a calculated strike at the very core of her power, her autonomy, her control. The war was no longer cold. It was personal.
The housekeeper comment was a bomb, and its fallout contaminated everything. There was no direct response from Madonna, no press release, no televised rebuttal. That wasn't her style. She absorbed the insult, processed it, and began to craft a response that would be far more damaging than a simple comeback. The battle moved from private dinners to the public square, but it was a war fought with proxies in coded messages. It was a masterclass in media manipulation. Prince struck first, using his preferred weapon, music and an unfiltered interview. While on tour, he was asked about a recent Madonna concert. He famously smirked and replied that her show was a circus, all spectacle and no substance. He criticized the lip-syncing, the choreography, the Hollywood nature of it all. Coming from a man revered for his raw, transcendent live performances, the criticism was devastating. It was a direct attack on her artistic legitimacy. He was positioning himself as the real artist and her as the fake pop star. Madonna's retaliation was far more subtle and arguably more brilliant. She didn't attack his music. That would have been a losing battle, and she knew it. Instead, she attacked his mystique. She began to drop little hints in interviews, playful but pointed jabs at his reclusiveness, his eccentricities, his height. She would tell stories of him being shy, almost childlike. She painted him not as a mysterious genius, but as a strange little man who was afraid of the world. She was chipping away at the very foundation of his power. He was a myth of his own making, and she was systematically dismantling it, brick by brick. She was a master of turning the media into her personal army. Unnamed sources would suddenly appear in tabloids with stories about Prince's bizarre demands or his diva-like behavior on the set of Purple Rain. Stories that were impossible to trace back to her, but that all served the same purpose: to humanize him, and in doing so, to diminish him. This was a psychological chess game played on a global scale. Every move was meticulously planned.
Prince would release an album like Sign of the Times, a sprawling, critically adored masterpiece that cemented his status as a musical prophet. It was a move that said, "You can play games with the media, but you cannot touch my genius." Madonna would counter with Like a Prayer, an album and a music video that were so commercially successful and so controversial that it became a global cultural event. It was a move that said, "Your genius is admired in quiet rooms, but my art starts revolutions and sells millions." Their careers became a twisted dialogue. He sought critical validation. She sought cultural domination. He built a fortress around himself at Paisley Park. She built an empire in the open, in plain sight. They were both winning, and they were both losing. They were locked in a battle for the soul of the 80s, and every song, every interview, every photo shoot was another calculated maneuver in their silent and vicious war. It was a conflict fueled not by hatred, but something far more potent, a terrifying, obsessive, and unwilling recognition of themselves in their greatest rival.
As the Cold War raged on, the battlefield shifted. It was no longer enough to dominate the charts or win over the critics. The new frontier was shock. The 80s were bleeding into the 90s, and the ultimate measure of an icon's power was their ability to provoke, to challenge, to shatter taboos. And in this arena, Prince and Madonna were nuclear powers. Their rivalry became an arms race of controversy, each trying to outmaneuver the other by pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in pop culture. Prince had always been a master of suggestion and androgyny. He played with gender and sexuality in a way that was both revolutionary and artful. But now his provocations took on a sharper edge. He wasn't just exploring sexuality, he was weaponizing it. Albums like Lovesexy, with its infamous nude cover, were a direct challenge to the conservative moral landscape of the time. He scribbled slave on his face in a battle against his record label, a shocking act of artistic protest that blurred the lines between performance and reality. He was a rebel, a spiritual provocateur, reminding the world that he was an artist who could not be controlled by a label or by public opinion. But for every shocking move Prince made, Madonna had a counteroffensive plan that was bigger, louder, and more explicit. She saw his artful suggestion and raised him a blatant declaration. This was the era of her sex book and the erotica album. It wasn't a suggestion of sexuality, it was a full frontal assault. The book was a cultural detonation, a deliberately controversial project designed to dominate every news cycle and conversation for months. It was a masterstroke of marketing, but it was also a direct response to Prince. It was as if she was saying, "You whisper about freedom in your cloistered studio? I will scream about it from the rooftops of the world. You hint at taboos? I will put them in a coffee table book and sell millions of copies." It was a war of philosophies. Prince's shock value was tied to his art and his personal freedom. Madonna's was tied to a broader cultural statement about female empowerment, censorship, and commercialism. The tension between them became a tangible thing, a force field that separated them at industry events. There's a persistent story about the 1991 Academy Awards. Prince was there, a regal and silent presence. Madonna was there in her full Marilyn Monroe glamour, having just performed Sooner or Later. They were the king and queen of the prom, but they were from warring kingdoms. According to insiders, their teams orchestrated their movements with the precision of a military operation to ensure they never crossed paths. Their dressing rooms were on opposite ends of the backstage area. Their arrival and departure times were staggered. The fear was that a chance encounter, a single shared glance, could trigger an incident. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of the deep-seated animosity between them. The real invasion wasn't of stages or territories. It was an invasion of each other's psychological space. Madonna knew that every provocative move she made would be seen and analyzed by Prince in his Paisley Park sanctuary. And Prince knew that every cryptic genius move he made would be studied by Madonna in her New York war room. They were living in each other's heads, two obsessive monarchs constantly trying to anticipate the other's next move in a relentless and escalating battle for the throne of controversy.